Sec. Okay. Oh, Dan's here. Great. Great to see Dan. Yep. Hello. Do you see my screen?
Yep.
Cool. Oh, yeah. Welcome to today's SIP call, SIP number 26, Friday, 16th December. Yeah, so today we'll be going through the Stacks 2.1 voting results. Jenny will give us a more detailed update today. Yeah, so it's great that it's been passed. So yeah, congratulations, everybody. So a bit of background to this SIP call, just for those who are new, who might be new. Here we collaborate on the development of SIPs. Here's where you can get your feedback. You can help each other. You can raise anything about SIP if you wish. So, yeah, it's where you come and advocate for your idea. And we try to make that a process as easily as possible, to the point where you don't even have to be a developer. So we are currently building out all the sort of system in place to support you for that. So yeah, so it's a great place. Please join every week. And here you get all the updates about all the SIP development. Yeah, so SIP is essentially just a document that documents the changes and improvements. Can be technical, but can also be the SIP process itself, which is more governance related. So yeah, all ideas welcome. So a bit of SIP update. So we've essentially moved a lot of stuff to the end, closer to being ratified. So, well, now the voting has passed. In theory, they are, I think, just waiting for the no's for the binary to come out and everybody to upgrade. But in theory, they are ratified, if I'm right. Is that right, Jude?
We got to pick a block height at which the rules start to activate first. After that, they're ratified.
Cool, cool. Yeah. So yeah, so SIP 15, as long as that's ratified and the block height is chosen, everything else will get ratified too. So yeah, that's SIP 20, SIP 18, 19, and SIP 15. We have a lot of requests for comment in the pipeline, actually. So things like the revision path, safe transfer. We got Matty Stacks, minor centralization stuff, which is work in progress. I believe there are 3 proposals on the table. So that's also ready sort of for people to comment on. BNS V2, I think mechanism is picking that up, which is great to hear. And also we got a new one from Hero about the BTC transfer request from the apps. Yeah, so those are a lot of requests for comments. We hope to push them through next year so that they can just start feeding into the pipeline, so that it can be reviewed. We will be hopefully to the point where the SIP editors will be ready. Then the cabs can review that afterwards. So yeah, we'll hopefully have the full process next year. But we have some earlier ideas, the Juliet's, the Werner's ideas. I think we can shape them up to be a proper draft to be reviewed, hopefully this year, if not early next year. And then we got the node improvement from Mutu, which will come hopefully next year too. So yeah, these are sort of everything sort of currently on the table. Yeah, so a big picture of you. So this year, my hope is we can help Werner to push through this or to finalize the spec for the trade definition for extending tokens. So I'm sort of encouraging everyone to go and comment on his SIP idea. I think would be great to get more technical guys on it, such as Hank and Fridger. So anybody who is willing to sort of help out Werner, who is a community member, to get this idea to be a proper draft, we really appreciate that. So please go and comment on his GitHub issue, which I'll drop in the chat in a bit. Yeah, and we have last Friday's Julia's SIP for Stacks Code of Conduct, which is quite interesting because you don't have to be the technical person to really chime in on this. Like, this is for everybody. So I would highly encourage everybody to have a look and like put down your thoughts. Like if something is too much or something is not. Yeah, this is where we can sort of help the community member to shape their SIPs, which will have a impact on the rest of the community later. So it's really important we get it right sort of upfront, as clean as possible. So yeah, I would also drop in the chat the links for you to go and take a look. Yeah, so the other one is the BTC transfer. I believe Yannick is actually the guy who is on it. I'll try and get him on to talk about this early next year. So yeah, it'll be, I think it's being proposed by Hero, a conversation from Ken and Mark and various guys to do with, yeah, requesting a BTC transfer. So yeah, I'll try to get those people on and to talk about it so we can all share knowledge. So yeah, so I'll leave a bit of like just the open floor before we get into the main topic. If anybody got anything they want to talk about or raise, yeah, please do. Okay. If not, let's get into the main topic of the voting results. So I'll stop sharing and let Jenny take over.
Thanks, Hero. Okay, give me one sec. Everyone see that? Yes. Okay. So some of you have probably already seen the results because they were posted on the Stacks.org Twitter, but we can quickly go over those for those who haven't. So congratulations to us, I guess, that it looks like we've effectively gotten permission from the community, not permission, approval from the community to move forward with the Stacks 2.1 upgrade. So actually, let's just go down to this. So just to review the original criteria. So in order for this vote to be considered valid and in order for us to feel comfortable with moving forward with the 2.1 upgrade, at least 80 million stacks need to have been used to vote. And at least 80% of those stacks used to vote needed to be used to vote yes on 2.1. And at least 66% of the liquid stacks, so the stacks used on ecosystem DAO, needed to vote yes on 2.1. I'm going to look at the chat, but okay, never mind. I'll save questions or any comments for the end. All right, so going to our results. So the overwhelming majority of the network has voted in favor of the 2.1 upgrade. 99% of stacked stacks and 79% of liquid stacks used to vote were committed in favor of the 2.1 upgrade. 142.2 million stacks were used in total. So that's the total voting power. And that's a bit of a jump from the last vote, SIP 12, which we'll look at later. Total voting power for those in favor of 2.1, just under 142.2 million. And total voting power against 165.5 thousand. And total accounts that voted, this was exciting. So from what we could see, verified accounts, there were 481 in total that were used to vote on the upgrade. 474 voted yes, 7 voted no. I'm going to stop there. Does anyone have any comments or questions on the results? Okay, so I wanted to do just a quick comparison of the two votes that we've had so far. So we had the SIP 12 vote last fall, and we had the SIP 15 vote just recently. So here's a side-by-side comparison. 136.6 million stacks were used to vote for SIP 12 compared to the 142.2. We had 28 verified accounts that voted versus 481 this time around. There are asterisks by this because, and Jude, you can confirm this for me, but there were 28 accounts that we could verify, but at least one of those was a pool operator voting on behalf of a stacking pool. So it could have been anywhere between like 28 to 158 because there are like 130 participants in that pool.
Yep, sounds right.
Okay, still quite a big jump if it is 158. That's exciting. And for last vote, there is one voting method offered. It was the method one that we offered this time around, so sending a Bitcoin transaction versus the 3 different voting methods that we offered for the SIP-15 vote. And just some background for those who weren't, really part of the development and execution process. In total, development and maintenance of these voting platforms took about 4 months of work. I remember us starting to talk about it in September, but it's been 4+ months of very consistent work. So checking in with each other every day. Shout out to Jude and Hero, of course, but also to Mike and Jason for their hard work on maintaining the platforms. Thank you guys so much. It's worth noting that neither of these were custom built for this purpose. Ecosystem DAO was an existing platform, but Mike did a ton of upgrading for this particular vote, and same for the SIP-15 website that was used. The same vote or the same site was used for the SIP-12 vote, but Jason also did a lot of updating and had to write lots of custom contracts. So again, thanks to you guys for doing that. We did a lot of work to discuss and promote voting this time around too. I think that was super noticeable. There was a comprehensive voting guide that was published. Hero had his custom voted badge that you could add to one of your NFTs, and that was very cool to see across social media. We had regular social media coverage and reminders about voting, at least 8 to 10 instructional walkthroughs of voting. Hero, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Did you do more than that?
Two badges.
Oh no, for the walkthroughs.
Oh, I did 10 walkthroughs.
Great. Okay. All right. So I was right about that. And we discussed it on at least 4 or 5 SIP calls, a couple of Twitter spaces, and numerous Discord calls. Am I missing anything on what we did to promote and share voting stuff with the community?
Oh, that's pretty good, I think. Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. So before we move on to the actual, I'm loosely calling this a retro. So something that we talked about doing on this call with this community is just doing like an evaluation or a debrief on how voting went this time around in preparation for actually publishing a retro or just an evaluation of voting in general for the community. So I think you all know how a retro normally goes. We're just going to start with some discussion questions and go from there. I am hoping that we can publish something more official. I think we'll publish something by the end of December, but publish something more official about our plans for voting moving forward sometime in January. But yeah, so before we go into that, I wanted to give some context. I was thinking a lot about voting and what it means to us, what is the most important thing about voting for us. And I found this quote from Jeff Amico from A16Z talking about crypto governance. And I'll just read it out loud for everyone. So he says, crypto protocols are meant to be governed by decentralized communities of stakeholders, not because it's more efficient or important for ideological reasons, but because it's necessary to unlock their core value proposition, that the underlying protocols will continue to run as designed and will remain open to anyone who wants to use or build on them without having the rules shift under their feet. Put simply, our primary objective in governance is to create the conditions necessary for protocols to achieve long-term adoption and self-sustainability. And we can, probably debate this quote, but based on this, it made me think that the priority of governance for us is essentially to maintain the integrity of the protocol. So just for everybody to keep this in mind, with a standard upgrade like this one, our intention is to introduce meaningful network improvements, but with minimal disruption to the status quo. Would others agree with that? Jude? Right. Okay. So it's important to keep that in mind. I think that there can be a lot of back and forth in the community about what features we want to introduce in an upgrade like this. And it can obviously be very competitive based on, who wants to prioritize what more. But the most important thing to keep in mind is that if we do that, we don't completely sabotage the chain and the chain experience that everyone is used to. And when I say standard, I'm trying to imply that the situation is one in which network conditions are generally stable. I think in the situation of an emergency upgrade, that would probably require different framing. But does anyone disagree with that premise that we're trying to maintain the integrity of the protocol and the chain above all else?
This is a lot similar in my ears to Linus Torvalds, the maintainer of the Linux kernel, the most widely used operating system on Earth. His design ethos, which is he has basically one rule: don't break people's programs. Well, he calls it "don't break user space." That basically means like future upgrades don't break backwards compatibility.
Right. Yeah. No, perfectly put. I think it's safe to assume that everybody in the community that's currently here is here because aside from, various minor grievances, if you're still here, it's because you are getting some benefit from the experience that you currently have on the chain. To have that experience completely pulled out from underneath you, or to feel like, you've been rug pulled on the experience that you're used to, that would be a serious violation of the decentralized principles and community that we're trying to build and maintain. So obviously meaningful improvements are important, but not at the expense of everybody in the ecosystem. So I see some of that here, and I'll share this doc so everyone can read it. But the way that I have qualified these kinds of improvements is that they're the kinds of improvements that if they were delayed in the short term, it wouldn't cause extreme distress to users and builders, but if delayed in the medium to long term, that would eventually force users or builders to leave. So it's important to note there's a balance between making sure that we maintain the same standard of experience for everyone, but not waiting too long to integrate these improvements that so many people want. And then I also want to just emphasize this point that network upgrades affect the entire community, and because of that, they need to have an overwhelmingly positive or at least neutral impact across the community in order to be justified. They shouldn't be implemented at the whim of a centralized identity. I think that we know that, but they're also not opportunities to make big bets or take moonshots in the interest of growth or financial gain. I think that's something that can be sort of confusing across this industry too. So what does that mean for voting? It means that, given everything that we just went over, it means that voting yes means that you believe that the upgrade will likely bring meaningful improvements to the network without sacrificing its integrity, while voting no means that you believe the upgrade runs a serious risk of compromising or making the experience of the network significantly worse for its users or builders. Voting yes without seriously considering the benefits of the upgrade, or voting no just because you prefer different upgrade features, would not be productive. So I just wanted to frame that in the context of this specific upgrade. There's a way to think about there's a way to think about how to vote yes or no. At least this is what I've thought in working on this voting process. Is everybody on board with that kind of framing, or would you look at it from a different angle?
I would like for there, I think we talked about this briefly. I would like for there to be maybe a way to have a third vote, a dissent, or a yes but or a no but kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think
actually,
we capture yes and no, but we don't capture any of the discussion around why yes or why no.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, Dan. And I didn't know how to articulate this as a question, but one of the things that I wanted to discuss with the group today was that, it kind of seems like when you see so many people saying yes, and you see so many people that you respect endorsing an upgrade like this, and your options are yes or no, it's kind of like you're forced into a yes, but there hasn't been an outlet or more of an official outlet where you can do the yes but. So I think that that's totally a valid question, and thinking about how we can do that effectively, I think it would be really good for our governance standard moving forward. Because in a lot of situations with these upgrades, it's like, yes, I agree, because I don't think this poses any major risks to the network, but where can I let folks know that I have other concerns or other priorities that I hope can be addressed in future? So maybe we can talk a little bit about that. I have some questions here that we can go through in whatever order the folks feel compelled to discuss them. So the first point I just want to make is that, so based on everything we just talked about here, what I'm trying to avoid as much as possible is just doing decentralized voting for the sake of decentralization, and also voting from a place of ideology. I think oftentimes we say things like, there are platitudes like voting is important because like your voice needs to be heard. That's true. But it's also equally important that people understand that these standard votes, they're aiming to improve the openness and accessibility of these existing network. It's not merely a symbolic or like principled thing that you're doing. Okay, so some questions here. Do we feel like the voting criteria were set fairly? So a little bit of background on that. Jude, I think the 80 million threshold was set by doubling the highest amount of stacks in one wallet, right? So it was 40 million is highest in one wallet. We doubled it to make sure that one person couldn't dominate the vote, or one wallet couldn't dominate the vote.
Right. I'm open to pushing that higher. But something occurred to me about the previous thing you had said about voting as a practical means that's principled as opposed to ideologically driven. The thing about voting here, that voting on chain specifically, that gets us, that we don't get from most other means, I think are actually twofold. First of all, no one is smarter than all of us together. So having a collective decision-making mechanism in some capacity is going to get you results at least as good as if you had picked the best or the smartest or some other metric of quality dictators for life to set the policies. So that alone means that, you put more brains in the room together to think about what's going to happen for the upgrades. You're going to get an upgrade that's at least as good, or at least as comprehensive as if you just picked the best idea or the best person for the job. The second thing is it's difficult for not everyone has an equal voice per se. So like, here's a good example. If you live in a different time zone from this call, for example, you're not on this call. If English is not your first language or even not your second language, it might be hard for you to respond in a timely manner to like GitHub requests or GitHub comments. You may feel like responding to GitHub might be dangerous for you based on where you are in the world. So having a vote with Stacks tokens specifically, or through some other on-chain activity, is basically a way to make sure that people's voices do get heard, even if they can't express them through other means. Because at a bare minimum, we can assume everyone can talk to the blockchain, but they may not be able to use other means or other tools to communicate.
Right. In that specific situation, Dan's point is really salient. Is if that's the only way to have your voice heard, is there a way that we can make it so that more nuanced communication comes through too, so it's not just yes and no?
Probably. That you can do a single vote at all means that you could do iterations you could do iterative votes. So it doesn't have to be yes and no for the whole upgrade. It could be yes and no for parts of the upgrade, or yes and no for parts of the upgrade, et cetera, et cetera. We could also, this would require some tooling, but down the road, we can make it so that the RFC process could also live inside the blockchain. You can make it so that, for example, comments that you want to have on an upgrade are shared through attachments that are sent alongside name update operations to your DNS handles. Just thinking that off the top of my head. Those at least have the property that, every blockchain node in the world is going to have a copy of them. So you wouldn't have to worry about trusting a third-party service to mediate discourse for you. That still requires, people to be able to talk to each other, read the same language, and it raises a bunch of other questions. But the point is we have a path forward here.
Dan, do you want to say no about, do you want to say more about the yes, but stuff? Do you have examples?
I think we had a lot of comments and questions about not just the vote, but also about the role of the cabs in leading up to the vote. So I don't really have more to say about it. I think there's just like we came to there were several discussions where we were all like, yeah, we want to do this, but we have this concern or we have that concern, or we also want to ask about X, or we want to ask about Y, or we want to make sure that Z is done first or something like that. So there were just several times that we had discussions where we ended up in this kind of space where we were like, yes, but not 100% yes.
Mm-hmm.
It was like 95% yes with this qualification or something like that. And then just, it would be nice to be able to capture that. I think even on the no side, I know that there were a couple of people that had some very strong opposition to pieces of it. And I think we lose, there's GitHub comments, but I think during the vote, I think what we get is this kind of like a lot of press or a lot of social media around like vote and this is going to be great and blah, blah, blah. But we don't get the no side. We don't get the no argument if there is one. And so having that available somewhere that's accessible would be just helpful to kind of give people some kind of context around what they're voting for. When I ask people to vote, I would point them at the SIP15 site and at the GitHub, but most people aren't going to actually read through GitHub comments, right? So we want to like make sure there's some balance there, some fairness in presenting the arguments. And I think the first step for that is just making sure we can capture the discussion in a more accessible way and the votes in a more accessible way.
For next time this happens, do you think it might make sense to request that each cab member post like 1,000-word or less summary of their vote decision alongside the SIP vote website?
I think as an option, yeah, because if you feel strongly enough about some position, knowing that at least it's going to be seen would be helpful, I think.
Because it's certainly a lot more approachable than trying to wade through hundreds of GitHub comments.
Absolutely.
I don't know if you know this yet, but the next major upgrade with SBTC, the SIP for that's already been dropped. So one big learning here, I think, is that we need to get the ball rolling on the SIP discussion a lot sooner, like before the code gets written.
Right, and that was one of the discussions we had. Is like this is really kind of a one-off. SIP 15 was not kind of our normal process, right? And so you can't really complain about it too much because I don't think it's like the normal process going forward. But still, we want to make sure that those voices are heard and stuff like that. So I think that's a great option. Like if there's a strong feeling about one way or another, that we have a way to put those on the voting site.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. I think we should try that next time. I don't think that going forward, everything's going to be all unanimous. There's going to be dissent because, we all have our own ideas about how the thing should work. But those ideas, but the reason we have cabs is so that domain experts in various aspects of blockchain design and implementation can provide substantial and useful reviews of SIP upgrades, and making that approachable to the community when they go to vote, I think, is actually a very important thing that we should be doing.
I'd just like to reiterate that I think the thing we talked about several times now with just having one subject at a time, I think resolves a lot of these issues, because like we don't want to get into this habit of like these omnibus SIPs with, it looks like a bill with pork loaded in there for all the different little parties here and there. If we just stick with one subject at a time, then we can avoid all of that mess that comes along with that. And I think that solves these issues.
I do want to actually push back against that. The thing about network upgrades like this is that they are very time consuming and they're very high touch. Like the whole ecosystem has to coordinate an upgrade. And as Jenny pointed out, like it took 4 months to go from standing start to doing the vote. What I would be curious to hear the technical cab's thoughts on are how can we how might we have multiple SIPs that are orthogonal to each other, doing different things, but have it so that, we still minimize the number of hard forks that have to happen.
Can I respond to that, Jude?
Yeah.
Actually, because this is something that we discussed, I think, at the beginning, actually as early as Q3. So we discussed this as part of the SIP process that we want to develop moving forward, but having some sort of like ranked choice voting system, or just a general prioritization system, where if we're getting on discussion early enough and there are enough ideas that we can have like a choice of 3 to 5 that folks want to choose for an upgrade, there's like a preliminary vote, or at least like preliminary discussion or filtering, where it would be obvious that the community says like, these 5 are all things that we want and are important to us, and we would feel unresolved if any of them were dropped. But for this next upgrade, we can live with prioritizing just these 3.
Yeah, for sure. We're going to have to do something like that when the bandwidth of breaking change SIPs exceeds our bandwidth to execute them in a timely fashion.
I feel like Kyle here tossing out just maybe a very stupid idea. Would there be a way to distribute the actual runtime as a part of the network? So that it could be a form of network upgrade instead of an actual code upgrade. If you understand what I mean, Jude.
Are you suggesting that the new consensus rules are like a live patch or like a smart contract or something like that that's deployed in band?
Yeah, but it wouldn't be a smart contract. I don't know the limitations of Rust. If it's possible to distribute live patches to running pieces of code.
It's not even a Rust thing, but that's highly unlikely to work because people tend to use like ASLR on their machines. So you can't even predict like where the addresses of different functions lie in memory.
Yeah. Okay. No, I was just curious.
That is a good idea. Like Tezos, I think, actually does something kind of like this. And the way that they do it is they make it so that most of the blockchain functionality actually lives in the smart contract layer. So the act of doing a breaking change is really the act of publishing a new version of these like system smart contracts that get updated when there's sufficient staker vote for it. We could try something like that. I'm definitely as a proponent of trying to do more things in band if they can be done in band.
Yeah, I mean, it's just this whole 6-month cycle with hard forks. It's kind of limiting.
But at the same time, though, like, so what I think we're getting at here is like, is there a way we could front load a lot of the work? Because it doesn't even have to be like a Rust thing or like an in-band smart contract thing. It could just be like, could the Stack software itself simply have an auto upgrade feature that gets triggered in response to a smart contract on chain that represents a vote or something like that?
Yes, exactly.
Sure, that could be done. Would
it be trusted? Would it be trusted is the question.
Right, you would still need to carry out the vote though. And that's at least a month, because the way that maybe it could be shortened to 2 weeks now that we don't have cooldown periods after 2.1, but you would also need to, implement the changes, get the cabs to sign off on them. I could see that shortening the time between upgrades to,
but I mean, that has cabs and everything that has to happen regardless, right? For any
it does. Like, I'm just trying to think like Amdahl's law here, like what cannot be, parallelized or pipelined or anything like that.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking mostly how could we shorten the whole 6-month thing, and make things more available, continuous delivery style.
I'm less worried about that right now because the bandwidth of all the engineers working on breaking changes is such that 6 months is about as fast as we can go as it is.
I agree. I agree with you now, but I'm thinking in 2 years.
I'm going to worry about the problem in 2 years then.
But I like to start thinking about at least start planning for how it can be in 2 years. Personally.
Okay, that's a wonderful problem to have. If you have any ideas, I'm all ears. Because I mean, again, invent upgrades definitely make things go easier.
No, I'm not trying to be a pain in the ass. I'm just trying to open everybody's eyes to start thinking about how will this work in 2 years? How can we make this faster? How can do you understand?
I'm just trying to think, like, if you look at like Ethereum, for example, which is probably the most widely used blockchain that has a pretty rigorous and aggressive hard fork schedule, they're still pretty slow. Like, I don't think they do 6 months. I think they do more like, once every year or something like that on average, unless it's an emergency.
Yeah, but they're much bigger right now.
I know, but that suggests to me that speed of executing hard forks is probably not the metric we care about. It's like, does the system solve business problems for people that cannot be solved anywhere else? Because if you can do that, then the hard fork schedule is irrelevant.
Yeah, but right now hard forks are required for any major functionality changes.
That's right, but that's also generally true of any blockchain.
Yeah. And I think that at least I feel that Stacks or Clarity is at least still pretty much in its infancy when it comes to being a language. And there's a lot of things that haven't been tried. There's a lot of people who haven't tried Clarity who are probably going to come later and have requests. Why can't I do this? How can I do this? And so on. And I understand that Clarity is the goal is to be as easily readable as possible. But sometimes that restriction, as we talked about with the bitwise operators, it becomes less readable.
Actually, there might be something here we could do. This is already something that can be done now, but just hasn't ever happened. There is a you take a look at SIP6, there's a protocol in place right now where you can vote on the cost function for any Clarity function anywhere that anyone writes.
SIP6.
Yeah, the reason why that's important is I want you to consider this hypothetical. Suppose that there suddenly is a very pressing and demanding need to verify Edwards 25519 signatures within smart contracts. Right now, there is no Clarity built in to do that. You can only do SecP256K1 signatures because that's the key that we use. That's the elliptic curve we use. What you could do without doing a hard fork is you could, for step one, implement a Clarity contract that actually does this. In Clarity, it executes the signature verification algorithm. It would be very slow. It would be very expensive, but at least it would be written in Clarity. Step two, you release a version of the Stacks blockchain software that when it sees a contract call to this function, it doesn't run the Clarity code. It runs a Rust native version of the equivalent Clarity code, thereby saving you the very expensive code path. Step three, when enough people are running that binary, is you run the SIP6 cost function upgrade to change the runtime cost of that Clarity function to something a lot cheaper, like more reflective of the native Rust performance. So that basically gets you the ability to add new Clarity built-ins as long as they can be expressed within the Clarity language without having to do a hard fork to get you there. People who don't upgrade would continue to use the old slow Clarity code path, but they would still verify the same all the blocks the same way as everyone else. It might take them a lot longer to do that because they're on the Clarity path.
Is the cost the same then?
Yes, the cost would be the same because that third step I mentioned, the SIP6 procedure, would be to change the cost function that's applied when that particular Clarity function, that Clarity contract function is called.
So how does it work with cost functions? How are they distributed?
There is, so any Clarity function anywhere can be a cost function for another Clarity function. There's a constraint that the cost function itself must be an arithmetic function, so it's read-only and it doesn't do any I/O. It just does computation, and it can live in any contract that gets deployed. I could deploy a contract right now that contains a cost function, and that cost function could be voted upon by SIP6 to be the cost function for any other Clarity function that exists in any contract.
But can my upgrade status of my node affect the cost? If the cost functions haven't been, if I haven't upgraded my cost functions, can I potentially be giving lower cost to a contract call, for example, than someone who's upgraded?
I'm not sure I understand the question, but the cost voting smart contract, you can take a look at it. It's what ensures that the Clarity VM looks at that smart contract to figure out what cost function to use for what Clarity smart contract call. So the fact that everyone voted, the voting procedure is such that, you know, everyone switches over to the same cost function at the same time when a vote is executed successfully,
regardless of version of node you're running.
That's right. It's been there since Stacks 2.0.
Yeah. Okay.
The reason no one's done this before is in part because there's a pretty high barrier to entry for doing a CIF6 vote. I think it requires like a very non-trivial fraction of stacks to not be stacked and actually carry out the vote. We can change that. Like certainly there can be a SIP that makes a CIF6 style vote much more tenable if that's something that we find ourselves needing. Like if we do a lot of in-band upgrades or enhancements to the Clarity language so that we have all these extra language facilities, then certainly this is a way we could achieve that. We might find ourselves in a situation where we need to do still do hard forks to, for example, improve Clarity's type system or add things like refinement types or type aliases, things like that. That would make this task a much more approachable task. But that's certainly a doable thing as well.
For me, it was purely curiosity. So.
But anyway, this would get you continuous delivery. You could write as long as the function you wanted to add to the VM can itself be written in Clarity, then you can ship versions of the continuously deliver versions of the stacks binary that has an accelerated version of that function's code body written in Rust, as long as it does the same thing as the Clarity function does. And through the CIF6 voting process, we can make it so that everyone at the same time upgrades their cost assessment for these functions, and they get faster implementations of those functions as they incrementally upgrade their nodes. So no breaking changes.
Sounds good. Thanks. Sorry for the drawn out question.
No, it's a great question. Like the nice thing about systems like this is that, you know, you don't need to, it keeps the status quo. Like no one's affected really by the existence of these things. And there's no need to slow down the pace of development to carry out a massive flag day each time you want to add a new function.
Right.
It's definitely on topic.
Something that we've shared before is that if there is a solution that doesn't require a hard fork, then let's explore that solution too. So again, another reason for having some of these discussions earlier and encouraging everyone to bring their ideas to the table, because there may be ways to incorporate everything that you want that won't require you to wait 6 to 9 months.
Yeah, but I mean, that was the core question. How could we avoid hard forks? Even if it's would require a hard fork today, how could we design things in a way, how could we build things in a way, code things in a way that could be distributed across the network in a way that doesn't require a hard fork? That was my main question.
Right, no, that was understood. I just mean that if there are faster and alternative ways, then they're also worth exploring, which should also be part of the discussion and evaluation process of the community, right? If there aren't outlets or there aren't enough touch points where people feel comfortable or sufficiently supported in exploring those ideas, then that's also a problem.
No, I don't think anybody can answer that on this call today, but hopefully some seeds were planted and people can think about it.
All right, do we want to move forward with some of these other questions? What seems to be top of mind or high priority? I have some questions about voting. I mean, we talked about voting criteria and whether those were set fairly. There was there's no malicious intent behind it, but I wouldn't say that there was like a sophisticated process behind setting them beyond what Jude and I outlined. I'd have some questions about what like a next step or goal for us could be in terms of getting more turnout from the community for the next vote. And also, actually, this might go to what you were talking about, Dan, but do we feel like we sufficiently communicated the potential risks of the upgrade? Why don't we start with that one? Because there's a chance that a lot of the communication about the upgrade was about the benefits and the upsides. How can we take a more balanced approach and also communicate, like, reasons why you might want to wait on some of these things, or reasons why you might not want to, I mean, not that we want to give people reasons in either direction, but it seems like there's maybe a lack of communication on the risk side.
Maybe
what were the risks? What were the downsides?
Can I say something about that quickly?
Yeah, sure.
So I think in terms of the risk, I think, yeah, we presented everything. So maybe it's getting those reviews much earlier on, and therefore we could have those review comments summarized and presented next to all the pros. So we have all the pros and cons laid out for people to vote. Either that was part of the blog or part of the actual website where people will be pressing the yes or no, or yes but no but buttons. Yeah, I don't know. That's just a quick thought.
I disagree that we called out the risks in any meaningful way. I don't think that would have changed anything in this particular case, because I think there was the upside kind of outweighs the risk, right? But yeah, I mean, I think Jude's suggestion and then what Hero just reiterated of getting kind of getting discussion up on the voting site would be a huge help in that. I mean, we don't want to gatekeep risks, right? Somebody's going to call out a risk, and we can have a discussion of whether that's a valid risk or not. But we also don't want to just have whoever the website designer was putting the vetted risks out there, right?
Well, we can certainly have multiple ways to communicate that. Like the cab members could each write their own opinions on what they believe the benefits and risks are. But we could also have like a fire hose from the community itself, like a comment box, or just a linear history of yes, and here's why, and no, and here's why. Like both of these things can exist at the same time, and they can both be visible on the website.
Yeah, I think there was already a message board component to the DAO as well, to where you could do SIP 18 signed messages that showed up in a feed or something like that too. And that sounds like a good fit for that fire hose, because then the only requirement is that you have a Stacks wallet in order to submit the transaction, or to sign the transaction and submit it. And I do think, like, when I look at the old process versus the new process here, like, we definitely made some strides, made some big improvements to how we approach the overall voting process, getting as many people included as possible. And I think there were definitely some wins there. And looking back at the comments earlier too, of like, if we can scope down what some of the changes are, then maybe we could look at things like making the vote a little more granular, to say like, this is where I voted yes for this or no for that or something similar, and then total it up that way, or having that ability to do like yes but or no but. I think those are a good direction to go as well. And then as far as like sharing the information, the Ecosystem DAO was experimenting with pulling information directly from GitHub to help display it, as far as like proposals and other ideas related to SIPs. So I could see some room in there where the comments for a particular SIP are exposed on the website in a way that people can interact with them or something similar. So I think these are good things to bring up. And I definitely, anywhere I saw any dissent or anything else, like I tried to spread it to people that I knew it would be relevant to, and we tried to discuss it in our group as well. So I feel like we definitely took a stab at this to do our best, put our best foot forward. But it is really curious to think of like, how could we have better done that, and how can we improve on this process moving forward too? Because the first vote for SIP 12, we just had the website, we had the one method. Now we had the ecosystem DAO alongside two methods. The next time we know that that's going to be our starting point. So we've already like learned a lot along the way too.
Yeah, I agree, Jason. I feel like the tricky thing is, you know, we could continue to get a higher and higher turnout, which would be great. But I also think that there's like a qualitative aspect of this that's harder to measure. So like behaviorally, if you know, I would take seeing more people engage on like the yes but or like the no but type discussions, and I would take that, or I would prefer seeing more of that over like, you know, a big increase in the number of people. I mean, I would want both ideally, but being able to see more of a diversity of folks engaged in the discussion, I think would be a really meaningful change here. Because I can see, you know, for the average community member, I can see the number of people who voted yes and no, and it's exciting to see. But I also don't know their more nuanced or particular sentiments about the upgrade itself. I can't immediately tell what about the upgrade people understand or are excited about. So getting more insight there would be a better next step, I think, for the next vote that we conduct.
I agree with you completely. And I also just want to point out Jesse Wiley's comment, removing the need for hard forks would be mind-blowing. And Jude's comment, that's what SIP6 was meant to do. Any effort that we can put on reaching that would be amazing, I think, because hard forks, they suck. Anything we can do to increase functionality, usability, and reducing hard forks would be amazing in my eyes, anyway.
Yeah, I agree. It's not that I'm a
Yeah.
proponent of hard forks or anything. It's more just acknowledging that that's the current reality of it. So
No, of
we
course,
work with-
current reality. But how do we move from current reality to reality 2.0?
Yeah, realistically, I feel like that would have to be a simultaneous effort, right? So like at the same time that we're trying to get more people involved in discussion or trying to uncover more specific sentiments in the community about how they feel about certain upgrades, it would be great if if there were a task force of people who are also working on figuring out getting rid of hard forks.
That'd be great.
Yeah, but
Do we have capacity for that? Are there folks who would be interested in focusing on SIP6?
I'm definitely interested because I hate the fact of having to wait 6 months, personally.
Yeah, I mean, that would be great. That could start here and today. Do you want to give context on SIP6 for those?
Sure. It's basically the same as what I just told Kyle earlier. If you want to add a new, if you want Clarity to have a new function that it cannot do right now easily, SIP6 is just a way for you to do that in a way that doesn't lead to breaking changes. You step one, if you can write your new, the limitation of SIP6 right now is that this only works if the Clarity function if the function you are trying to write can itself be implemented in Clarity. But that's not a huge limitation by itself for most things. Like the bitwise operations that Kyle shipped could have been done this way. The first step is you make a smart contract that has the implementations of the functions you want to add to the Clarity VM written in Clarity. Step two is you send a PR to the Stacks blockchain code base that makes it so that whenever code control flow transfers to those functions and that smart contract, instead of evaluating the Clarity code there, it runs a Rust native version that does the same exact thing. Step three is you use SIP6 to make it so that the runtime cost assessment to calling these smart contract functions reflects the Rust performance characteristics, not the Clarity performance characteristics. So that way you can implement a very elaborate, very expensive smart contract function in Clarity, and then make it so that it actually only costs as much block space as if it had been implemented in Rust natively this whole time.
Then I feel like I retract my volunteer status. That sounds so much more complicated than.
Well, one way or
thought it should
another,
be.
like you're going to have to implement some sort of flag day where everyone starts to use the new function you add to the Clarity VM. This is what systems that don't do hard forks basically do. Like Tezos is not too different in this capacity. I think we actually cite Tezos as like the inspiration for this. You submit the new change you want to see in the VM's behavior, and you implement a way for everyone to at the same time upgrade their VMs to use it.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I think, my original comment. That's kind of what I was going for. How could we distribute the Clarity VM as kind of a package that gets unpacked and verified by different nodes, instead of nodes having to actually update if it's just a Clarity update?
Well, no one has to upgrade in this system here. It's just that
No, I get that. It's just that they can't process the new contracts that are built with new functions.
Oh, they absolutely can. It's just in a wall clock sense slower to do so, because Rust native code tends to go faster than the Clarity code. But you'll still evaluate all the same blocks the same way, and your node won't diverge from the network.
Not if you have a node that's running with functions and except taking a Clarity function that doesn't exist for you.
Oh, it does exist for you.
What?
Yeah, because
like bit end. If I haven't updated my node to something that accepts bit end, for example.
If it accepts what? I'm sorry?
Bit end, like the bitwise functions.
Sure. So let's walk through an example here. Suppose that you wanted to add bitwise, the 4 bitwise functions you added via the SIP6 process. The first step would be you publish a smart contract somewhere that implements all of those functions in Clarity.
Yeah.
Okay. Step 2, you would separately send a pull request to the develop branch, not the next branch, the develop branch of the Stacks blockchain, such that made it so that when somebody calls one of these bitwise functions, instead of having the VM evaluate the Clarity code, it calls some Rust code instead that does the same exact thing. With me so far?
No.
Okay, so obviously the virtual machine knows, like, where it is in the control flow at all times. It has to. So when the VM sees, oh, you're about to call bitwise and, instead of evaluating the code body for bitwise and, it'll just call some other Rust function that you implement internally, and evaluates that instead. And then it returns the same value that the Clarity function would have returned for the same inputs.
But that can't be true for a Clarity node or a Stacks node that doesn't know about Clarity.
All Stacks nodes know about Clarity.
2.1. I mean.
Can I jump in with maybe a clarification? So Jude, in the situation where you're defining, say, bit and here, sure. The use case, it's not a direct, like, it can't do exactly what we did with this hard fork, because when you're calling that function, you're calling it as a contract call, right? You're not just calling bit and like a built-in function. So
yes, that's generally true. They're all contract calls.
Yeah, I think that's the big difference, right?
Yes. I'm sorry if that wasn't clear.
Does that clarify anything, Kyle?
Yeah, no, I think so. I'm thinking more the nodes that haven't updated and they get a contract with bit end in it. What will they do?
Well, as Bryce just said, they're going to see a contract call to bit and. So in the nodes that don't upgrade, they would simply evaluate the Clarity code body for bit and as part of that contract call.
So there's no way to add a new, like, built-in function. It's just replacing a contract call.
No, but
with
what would they get for? Will they get an error? Is that a check error?
No, it will work, because in the old versions of the node have just the Clarity implementation of bit and. The new versions of the node have a Rust native implementation that is algorithmically equivalent. So they'll both evaluate the block that contains that contract call the same way. Like I could do this today. I could make a version of the stacks node that replaced all contract calls to
The Clarity Bitcoin library.
sure, the Clarity Bitcoin library with Rust native implementations. Totally fine. It'll work. It won't be a consensus bug. I can run this. You can run your old nodes. Our nodes will process the same blocks the same way.
But that doesn't make sense to me, at least. If I'm running an older node that has no concept of bit and.
Okay, here's a helpful analogy. You know how you can run computers without graphics cards and they still render the same screen, even though they don't have a graphics card?
Yeah, I get that, but bit and I shouldn't even know about.
Bit and is a smart contract function in this case. Like you're doing a
Yeah.
contract call to bit and. You're not adding a native bit and built in.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
it's new to the node, right?
It's been implemented in Clarity before it gets replaced with a native implementation. So if you don't have the native implementation, then you just roll back or you fall back to the Clarity implementation that is on chain already.
That's right.
Okay, no. I trust you guys.
Yeah, like maybe another way to think of it is perspective, right? Like, so for the node itself, if it has the built-in function, it'd use it and fall back on the Clarity. But for the implementation, you would basically start by calling this Clarity function, and then you're telling the nodes to say, if you see this Clarity function, we can use the built-in instead because it works better.
Yeah.
Okay, so the execution of a function is distributed.
As a new version of the node software, but it's backwards compatible. So there's no timetable for people to upgrade.
Okay, so if I as a new node or old node don't see this, then I reach out to the network and ask, is there anybody else who knows this function?
No, you're just going to evaluate the Clarity code body of the contract call that you're carrying out.
Okay, but if I'm not upgraded,
Your node is slower. That's the only visible difference in its performance.
Yeah, like
Okay.
if you're not upgraded, your node's going to call the contract. If you are upgraded, your node's going to use the built-in library.
yeah, okay, got it. Sorry, no, it's my trying to understand everything that's slowed this whole meeting down. So I'm sorry.
All good.
No, don't
It's one of
apologize.
the more obscure
Very
features of
helpful.
the system.
No, this discussion has been really helpful. Thank you everyone for being so engaged. Normally with
No, I
Deborah's
appreciate it.
discussions-
Thank you so much.
Bryce,
No
to your, I'm sorry, Jenny.
Oh no, go ahead, Jude.
Oh, Bryce, I was going to say to your point, like a subsequent, it would have to be a hard fork to do this, but it could be the last time we ever do this. We could make it so that you can define new native Clarity keywords as like a Clarity language facility. Like through something like SIP6. You could have a way to like vote on a smart contract public function to become a Clarity native keyword.
Yeah, that would be interesting. So like initially it's a contract call, but once that process has completed, then you can switch over to a native function.
Exactly. And then the system just keeps track of, oh, this is really this code body over here they're going to evaluate.
Yeah. No, that'd be interesting.
We could totally do that next hard fork. That's not even a very big lift at all.
Yeah, I like that.
So to answer the concretely answer, I think what Kyle was asking, smart contracts themselves become the delivery mechanism for new Clarity virtual machine functions. And so we simply make it possible to turn smart contract functions into Clarity native functions with the option of later upgrading to a version of the binary that has a machine code implementation of that function as opposed to a Clarity implementation of the function.
Yeah, I guess where my brain has stopped is that when I implemented new functions, then I was forced to change the code in the Clarity VM.
But that's okay though. It doesn't have to be a backwards compat. It doesn't have to be a breaking change.
No, but I mean, like, how would old nodes know about those new changes? Is kind of what I'm getting at.
That could be
If
part of
we
the SIP.
implement, well,
One way or another, like you're going to have to change the actual, zeros and ones binary you're running on your machine somehow. You can either do that by stopping it and restarting it with a new version, or you can figure out some way to do like a live patch. Either way is approachable.
yeah, the live patch was the thing that I was mostly interested about. Is there a way to achieve live patch of the? Oh, sorry, now I have a kid that's bugging me.
I would be very terrified of a naive like function pointer based way of doing that, because you might stomp all over their heap or their stack and lead to a node crash or memory corruption or something like that. We could factor the code base so that the Clarity VM ran as like a sub process of the blockchain, so that the act of upgrading the Clarity VM is just the act of having the main blockchain program go and fetch a new version of that.
That's
of the binary.
kind of in the lines of what I was thinking. I'm not thinking today. I'm thinking in 2 years maybe. But
Sure.
that would be really interesting, I think, to make the actual VM, the thing that's executing the smart contracts, a little bit more modular than having to completely update your nodes. And especially if that could become automated in some way, that I'm running a node and I don't have to worry because I know that there will be a consensus mechanism in updating the nodes. VM implementation.
Sure. I would also recommend that there be a way for people to say no. I don't want to upgrade. I'm not going to relay people's blocks that do upgrade. Because
auto upgrade or manual upgrade. That's actually common in a couple of other consensus critical. I can't think of what they are right now. But
that's how SegWit got adopted in Bitcoin. Like enough people said, like, no, I'm not going to run a node that accepts blocks from miners that don't vote for SegWit, and it basically forced everyone else to upgrade that way.
Yeah. Just tossing out ideas.
All right, well, thank you for all the discussion, everyone. We are over time, but I want to make sure that all of this is captured so that we don't leave any of these discussion points hanging. There will be a recording of this, and I'll be working on a retro and adding some of these points, but are there any other ways that would help you all continue to engage with this discussion? A forum post, GitHub issue to work through some of these ideas?
I would say keeping it as few as possible would be best.
Okay.
I was going to say, Jenny, just splitting out the governance issues from the kind of mechanics of the upgrade, and
yeah,
they're quite separate discussions.
Okay. All right, so maybe GitHub. I'll figure this out afterward. But no, thank you guys so much. I mean, we have this weekly SIP call, so if we want to continue any of this discussion, we have the space to do so. And like I said, we'll publish just like a very basic voting results evaluation before the end of the year. And then in the new year, I think we want to publish something a little more elaborate that goes into what our goals, aspirations are for governance, decision making, and the hard fork schedule, or no hard fork schedule. We figure out how to do that.
But it feels like Discord is where at least majority of these people are.
Yeah,
long form stuff tends
everywhere.
to happen on the forum, though.
Yeah, we can go over this very quickly, but
I have a
communication
Stacks
is
forum account,
so
but I haven't been
confusing
active,
across all
so-
these different platforms, Kyle, that they're just places that are best for certain kinds of discussion. So forum is
Yeah.
good for long form asynchronous discussion. Discord is great if you're trying to get, instant responses, but a lot gets lost on Discord, which is why people request that we put notes on the forum and on GitHub as well.
Yeah. No, I'm new. I started I have an account at the Stacks forum, so I can
Yeah,
try
we'll
to
help direct you to the right places. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks everybody. Have a good weekend.
Thanks everyone.
Thank
You
you.
too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Cheers.
Yeah,
Thanks.
everyone.